My name is Andrew Bustamante, and I'm a former CIA intelligence officer. I spent 7 years living and working for CIA, and this is everything I am authorized to tell you. CIA is always asking itself the question, is it worth killing foreign lives to protect American lives? And the answer is always yes. There's two types of killings that we really have to talk about here. There's intimate killing, and then there's non-intimate killing. And when I say intimate killing, I mean you look in the eyes of the person whose life you're taking. Most of CIA is equipped to enable not intimate killing, which is when you have a drone, or you have a missile, or you have a rocket of some sort, or you set some sort of sabotage that's designed to kill people. My operational history does include enabling non-intimate kinetic strikes against terrorist targets specifically. And many of us participated in the global war on terror from 2000 to 2022. There were kinetic strikes against terrorist targets all over the world, sometimes many times a week. While Obama was one of the best presidential diplomats that the United States has ever seen, he was also very heavy-handed in terms of covert action. And he was very decisive in his choices to use non-intimate killing as a way of going after high-priority targets in the terrorist world. I have become almost harshly, ruthlessly pragmatic about the fact that I want America to remain the only superpower in the world, because as soon as our superpower status slips and someone else rises to meet our challenge, we all become that much less safe and secure. The CIA, as a bureaucracy, evolves very slowly, but its mission stays crystal clear. It is there to ensure American primacy through national security and the stealing of foreign secrets. When you consider the intelligence community as a whole, there are many pieces, many players, many different agencies that are included. I think it's currently at 36 or 37 different members of the intelligence community, of which CIA is only one member, along with DIA and NSA and NRO, DOD, the Army, the Air Force, the Navy. What CIA is charged with, however, is being the hub, the central intelligence agency, meaning all the other intelligence collection activities must funnel through CIA to be created, to be transformed into what we call a final product, a final analytical or final intelligence product that is then sent to the executive in the president's daily brief. In order to understand what CIA is today, you have to recognize that 9/11 was a massive turning point in how CIA operates. The pre-9/11 CIA is very different than the CIA post-9/11. 9/11 was a massive intelligence failure, the largest in American history. But following the 9/11 Commission, findings about CIA and the requirement for CIA to have heavy oversight completely transformed the nature of the spy business for not just Central Intelligence, but for all of the intelligence partners in the IC. What I understand of the pre-9/11 CIA, it was the Wild West. CIA was a giant experimental laboratory first, and an organization of accountability second. Since 2001, they have become an organization of accountability first, and they are much, much less experimental. Anything that your adversary was doing was fair game for you to experiment with. And it's not hard to understand why, because if your adversary finds an unfair advantage using human trafficking or drug smuggling, and that puts your national security at risk, then you have lost that game. You have lost that chess match. So if you want to keep up with your adversary, if you want to keep pace with your opponent, you have to be willing to work outside of the bounds of moral and ethics that your citizenship, that your citizenry actually has to fall within, because you're charged with protecting them from the outside threats. You're not charged with enforcing the ethics and the morality within the country's boundaries. Espionage is illegal everywhere. However, when you swear an oath as a covert intelligence officer in support of an intelligence agency, you actually fall under a very strict carve-out in American law that makes it so that you can commit espionage against foreign targets in support of national security when it is ordered by an authorized person. It is illegal for a CIA officer to pursue an American citizen without disclosing their affiliation to CIA. But FBI, Homeland Security, border security, they are actually able to pursue operations against American citizens under their authorities, which are different than CIA's. The way that the government spies on the American people isn't the way that you think it is from TV and media. The government doesn't have to dedicate really almost any resources to spying on American citizens, because American citizens basically give up all of their raw data to corporations. So all CIA or FBI or DOD really has to do is become a commercial client of a big data company, and they can get any information they need. So why would you try to break the law and listen in on an American's phone call when you could just buy their phone records from Verizon or from Sprint or from T-Mobile? We are not a police state. We are a commercial state, which means that the federal government, as long as it has a national security requirement, there will be a commercial company who rises to the occasion to meet that requirement and do it all legally. Edward Snowden's whistleblowing about the operation that NSA was running, in many ways, what he was blowing the whistle on was the illegal use of legally collected data. So you have this very small, very narrow cutout that lets you commit crimes all over the world and be protected by the status that you're in as a sworn officer in an intelligence agency. My path to CIA was not traditional, but it was fairly common still. I was actually trying to get into the Peace Corps, believe it or not. I was leaving the military. I was a nuclear missile officer, wore a key around my neck that would destroy the world. And after doing that for 2 years, living underground, I wanted to do the exact opposite. Imagine the last time you had a bad breakup with a girlfriend or a boyfriend. You leave the one relationship, and what do you look for? Something that is the complete and polar opposite. But in the process of that online application, a red screen popped up that said you may be qualified for other opportunities in the federal government. Will you put your application on hold for 72 hours while a recruiter reaches out to you? Because of what the Peace Corps is looking for. It's looking for people with a high risk tolerance. It's looking for people that are embracing discomfort. It's looking for people who are essentially open to the idea of trying to do the impossible, trying to make some broken part of the world whole again. And that type of person is also well suited for undercover intelligence work, because all the odds are against you, you have to embrace discomfort, and the risks are massive. So it's, when you look at the two side by side, you can really see that the people who give up their lives in pursuit of an ideology are really quite the same, even though their ideology might be different. Once you work for the Peace Corps, you are forever banned from working in intelligence. And once you've worked in intelligence, you are forever banned from working in Peace Corps. It's something that the federal government does to make sure that our Peace Corps representatives, our true Peace Corps reps, are never accused of espionage overseas. So like any 27-year-old male who's single, I was always looking for the next best things. 24 hours later, I got a phone call from a 703 unlisted number, and that started my whole application process for CIA. Training at CIA is better than it is in the movies. In the movies, it makes it look like everything's, fancy and high tech and cutting edge, and it's not quite like that. It's much more austere. It's much more challenging and old school than that. But it really is a ton of fun, and you go through all that training with other people. The specific lengths of training at CIA are also one of those topics that's still classified. The details of the farm are still classified, and the full length of the farm is also still classified. But I will tell you, it's many months, and it is not many years in order to get up to speed as a field officer. What CIA wants is people who can handle a great deal of outside stimuli with very little emotive response, which makes people who are anxiety prone, autism prone, or pathological liars, sociopaths, it makes them very attractive, because when you have an antisocial personality disorder or when you have a diagnosable form of autism, you are already insulated against massive changes in your emotional state, which makes you more effective in training, but it also makes you more effective in the operational field. There are different ways that CIA pressure tests its trainees to measure an emotional response. One of the core things they do is they oversaturate you, what's called task saturation. They give you more tasks than you could ever possibly complete, whether that's in an hour or in a day or in a mission or in a simulation or even in a classroom. That's a very basic example, a very simple example of one of the things that can happen in the first few days of training. As training goes on, they put you through other types of more intense efforts to see what your emotional response might be. Whether that's exposing you physically to very cold temperatures, whether that's sleep deprivation, whether that's simulated capture, simulated interrogation. When you sign up for CIA, many people are surprised when they find out that they have to go through some very intensive training to be able to understand how to resist torture, how to survive or sustain through torture, and how to manage captivity. Torture is a sensitive topic at CIA and in many parts of the world, and it's not a surprise that it is such, right? Because the reality is that torture is inhumane. But the other reality is that torture is very much used by enemies of the United States. We prioritize the need to escape above all other priorities, even above the priority of protecting cover, protecting secrets, and anything else. When you watch a TV show or a movie and you see somebody resisting torture by just stating their social security number and saying that they're a soldier, that's not really how it works when you're an intelligence operative. Instead, it's a continuation of the cat and mouse game. You're always trying to compete with the person who has you in captivity because you need to retain enough resources to effectively escape so that you can get back with the intelligence that you've collected as a captive. And if you think about it, a captive has a great deal of information. You understand how you got captured, you understand how you're being held, you understand the rotation of guards, you understand the questioning, interrogation. So to be able to regain someone who's been captured is an incredibly valuable thing from an intelligence point of view for CIA, which is why they are more focused on that than they are on whether or not you disclose parts of your secret identity or parts of your operation along the way in order to resource yourself for a proper escape. Lying is a fundamental skill when you are a field officer, but it is very much a learned skill. In the process of being recruited to CIA, you go through many different psychological batteries, personal interviews, actual tests, interviews where you talk to psychologists, you talk to seasoned officers, and throughout that time, what they're really doing is assessing your natural ability to lie and your natural ability to fabricate according to a specific storyline that they give you, which is a whole different level of lying. They're just going to sharpen that sword, refine that ability further. I always wondered if there was something wrong with how much I enjoyed lying until I met some of my peers at CIA. There's one person who became a close friend of mine at CIA. He's still undercover. He's in a very deep cover capacity. Fantastic guy, fantastic friend. He was such an effective liar, he could have been fabricating the entire thing. He could have convinced me that he was a good friend, when in fact he wasn't, because he was, by all accounts, a pathological liar. He was somebody who lied simply because he got a dopamine rush, a personal satisfaction from lying to anyone and everyone around him. This individual who became someone I really do count on as a friend, it's unsettling even now to think that it could have all been fabricated. I could have been just one of his exercises in his pathology for lying. When you've spent enough time inside CIA, you start to see how everybody is using you. It's there to manipulate people. Somehow when you're coming on board, when you're going through the recruitment process and the training process and you're a young officer, you believe that they're there to support you. You believe that you are outside of the manipulation. But then as you get more seasoned, as you continue on in the years, you start to see that the promotion process inside, the personal development and professional development process inside, the way that some missions are given to some people and other missions are not, it's all just an example, a microcosm of the larger organization's way of executing operations. And you start to see that the senior levels of CIA are manipulating the lower levels of CIA because that is the school of thought that we were all trained in. We weren't trained in leadership development and motivation and encouragement. We were trained in manipulation and deception and fabrication. So is it a surprise that the culture within the building is just a representation of exactly the same skills that we teach every junior officer? CIA has a concept called the 3 lives, and it talks about the 3 different types of lives that all people live. There's our public life, our private life, and our secret life. The public life is the public persona that you put on every morning, every day that you step out of your house, your apartment, or your office. It's when you act like you're paying attention when you're not. It's when you laugh at your boss's jokes even though they're a jerk. It's not who you really are. It's just who you have to be in order to forge the life that you're trying to build. Behind that public life is a private life. That private life is a life that's only known to you and your closest associates, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your wife, your mom, your dad. Right? In this private life, they know that you're really very kind, even though you are rude in public. They know that you are sensitive and creative, even though you seem aloof in public. What most people think is that a relationship, a true meaningful relationship, happens in your private life. What CIA knows is that there's a third life altogether. Now, third life is your secret life. In your secret life, that's the place where you keep your deepest, darkest secrets. And in order for it to be a dark secret, it usually has a very dark element to it. It's where you put your shame. It's where you put your guilt. It's where you put the questions that you can't stop asking before you fall asleep at night, but you don't want to burden anyone else with. All of that is what happens in your secret life. And the cognitive reality is that everybody has a secret life. Think about that. When you let someone into that life, that is when you build a true forged relationship, lifetime trust, lifetime equality. Because in your entire life, you're only going to let maybe a half dozen people into your secret life. And once someone's in your secret life, they never leave. That's the power of the secret life. CIA teaches a system for how you break through a target's public life into their private life, and from their private life into their secret life. They teach us that system because in order to make a true reporting asset, someone who was a patriot for their country, who is now a traitor against their country, the only way to win a person's loyalty to that extreme is to get into their secret life and convert them from being loyal to their country to being loyal to you. The Human Intelligence Asset Recruitment Process. It's a process that's acronymed SADRAT, S-A-D-R-A-T. And that process is a very well-documented process cognitively, clinically, and then also in the intelligence sector, military intelligence, FBI, CIA. SADRAT stands for Spot, Assess, Develop, Recruit, Handle, and Terminate. Yes, handle starts with an H, but the acronym uses the letter A. That is because it is still a federal government acronym. So that's just how the federal government spells things sometimes. But this process of SADRAT is exactly how you take an asset from stranger, S, all the way through to secret life controlled target, which is when you are handling them. And then it even includes a step where you distance yourself from that person that you control because it's either in your best interest to get away from them or it's in their best interest to get away from you. And that's where the T in terminate comes from. But the whole SADRAT model is one of those nested processes that helps to dictate how you control or develop an important relationship intentionally. When you are required not to appear as your true self, then that requires that you don some elements of costume. And there are different levels of costume that you can don, different levels of disguise. The department that oversees disguise is called a costume department. Some are very temporary, some are quite permanent, some involve body changes, gaining weight, losing weight, having tattoos erased, having tattoos added. Some involve just throwaway things, fake wigs, fake mustaches, sunglasses, anything you can imagine. But the real objective operationally is just to make sure that you do not appear as your true self within a specific distance. So someone from 40 feet away has to do very little to not appear as themselves. Somebody from 4 feet away has to don quite a lot of costume in order to not look like themselves. The costume department at CIA is it's a room. It's a large room, and it's very much like walking kind of behind set on any TV set. You go in, the people who are working there are highly creative people. They smile, they're high energy. They're not your typical expected closed-door CIA officer. Imagine, flamboyant homosexuals, people of all ages and colors, lots of women, lots of bright colors, lots of creative things just hanging on the wall. Because these people are charged with not only creating a costume that changes your identity, but a costume that has functional practicality as a spy. So not just a jacket that you would never wear, but a jacket that you would never wear that also has hidden pockets, right? And also happens to have a bulletproof vest, and also has a way of being taken off and turned inside out. Like, these are the kind of incredibly creative people that exist, not on the top floor at Langley, but in the basements of Langley. People refer to the CIA headquarters as Langley, Virginia. And that's funny because the actual city it's in is Langley, Virginia, but at headquarters we never call it Langley. We call it headquarters. Even in our written traffic, we refer to it as headquarters, or HQS. It's technically two buildings, what we call an old headquarters building and a new headquarters building. And that's the only overt, non-classified building that I'm able to disclose. There are several buildings that belong to CIA that house CIA officers, but they're all still covert in nature, and their locations are not something that I can disclose. We really are a self-contained unit, almost like a terrarium, where we don't need any support from outside. We can do everything within the confines of CIA, which is exactly how CIA wants to operate, because they have to be so heavily compartmentalized. CIA is a massive city on its own. It's got its own food, its own water sources, it's got its own industry inside. The land that headquarters is on is a large lot of land with a massive parking lot that wraps around it. In fact, it's the parking lot that most people complain about, because it's a huge parking lot, and for you just to get to your office, it's often a 15 or 20-minute walk through this winding, massive parking lot just to get to your office. The size of the parking lot and the way that it's laid out is very much based on security. They don't want cars to get within a certain distance just in case one of the cars or a CIA asset is compromised. Unfortunately, it's not a totally rare occurrence for a CIA officer to be compromised to some sort of adversary or enemy. So they keep cars a certain distance from building walls in case there's a car bomb. We know there are four core levers, four core motivations that drive people to take action. Those four different motivations are reward, ideology, coercion, and ego. Reward means getting what you want, whether that's money or a free cruise or a car. Anything that you get in response to doing what you were told is considered a reward. Ideology is a motivator that comes from within. So whether you're Christian or Jewish, whether you're African American and you were raised to remember, your African roots, or whether you're Latin American and you were raised to remember your Latin roots, all those things fall under the idea of ideology, something that drives you from within. Ego is whatever makes you the person you want the public to see, right? So people often mistake ego with egotism or egotistical, which means that you have an inflated sense of yourself. But in fact, Mother Teresa had an ego. Gandhi had an ego, right? These are people who wanted to represent something publicly, so they made decisions and took actions in the same vein as the public image they wanted to present. Coercion is the weakest. It's the least predictable. And coercion is when you try to force someone to do what you want them to do by using shame or guilt or some other form of overt manipulation. It's much easier and more reliable to get people to take action based on the other three: reward, ideology, or ego. When you try to force them into something, when you try to force them to do something using coercion, you violate their trust and you make it so they know that they can never count on you or trust you ever again. It's much easier to slipstream in and manipulate someone based on their existing ideology or ego than it is to try to force them to your will using coercion. Sexpionage is a term that has become popular because it refers to the act of sex in operations. And that can be, it is often categorized as straight heterosexual sex, female operatives seducing male targets, but it can also be homosexual operations. It can also be group sex operations. It can be any kind of kinky operation that you think of. In real life, sexpionage is a thing and sexpionage works. What's important to understand is that sex in operations is not something that the CIA encourages or condones for its own officers. And the reason is because each CIA officer is an American citizen first, which means they are entitled to all the rights, privileges, and protections of any American citizen. So just like you can't force someone into a sexual act against their will, you can't order someone to execute a sexual act against their will. So CIA very much prides itself on professionalizing all of its officers to keep sex completely separate from operations. That said, foreign countries have learned that American culture and American ideology is one that is oftentimes repressed or intimidated by the concept of sex. For as powerful a country and as wealthy a country as we are still very sexually repressed. So it's a very successful operational tactic for foreign countries to use sexpionage against American targets, because in a foreign country, the individual does not have the same rights and protections that a US citizen has. So perhaps China would order a Chinese intelligence officer to have sex with an American target, or Russia would order it, or Belarus would order it, right? Because they have a completely different set of governing guidelines for their citizens, and they know that American citizens are susceptible to love, acceptance, physical intimacy, and oftentimes we feel guilty about it because we were built on a Christian foundation. The simple fact is that the future outlook for any first world country, and the United States included, is dark. It's bleak. It's difficult. In my assessment, World War III has already started. World War III has been going on for almost a full decade now. When you think about World War I and World War II, the two conflicts were totally different, even though they were only a few decades apart. And when you think about how war has evolved since World War II, to Vietnam, to Desert Shield, Desert Storm, through to even what we did in Afghanistan and Iraq, the nature of war is always evolving. Why would we think World War III would look anything like World War II, nuclear weapons and superpowers? Instead, World War III is based off of common current military doctrine, which the most current military doctrine is the doctrine of proxy war. When you have two vested competitors who are funding proxies to fight on their behalf. What was Syria? What was Libya? What is Yemen? What is Ukraine? What is Israel? These are all countries that are the conflict is being funded by outside aggressors who are really trying to compete with each other. It's the Chinese and the Russians and the Indians and the British and the Americans and the Canadians all funding conflict through these poorer third world countries. That is the definition of proxy conflicts, because you can risk international power without risking your own citizenship's lives. This is the world that we live in. Your allies are not your allies because they believe in you. Your allies are your allies because you serve some sort of need that they need. It's very much a business transaction. They have a need, you have a service, and vice versa. I left CIA in 2014 for family reasons. And when I say family reasons, I don't mean something went wrong with my family. I meant I had a family, and I could quickly see that the life CIA wanted for me was not the life that I wanted for my family. My wife, who's also a CIA officer, she and I met at CIA. We met and lived and worked undercover. We had our first child in 2013. And by the time that child was 1 year old, we quickly saw that we were consistently choosing work ahead of parenthood. Even though we had chosen to become parents, the thought that kept me up at night was I was constantly wrestling with, do I pick my career over my child or my child over my career? And the fact that I was having that struggle at night is what cued me in to the reality that CIA didn't care about me. CIA just saw me as another resource, another number, another person to do the job. But my son would never see me that way. My children of the future would never see me as something that's replaceable. Well, when I took that message to my supervisors at CIA and I tried to find a way that I could be a present father, but also be an effective CIA officer, they didn't have any patience for that discussion. It was a very clear either-or choice to them. They were not prepared for my answer, and they were not prepared for the answer of the people who came after me. Because from 2014 to today, CIA has seen a mass exodus of talent, because the old ways of trying to coerce people to stay in your system isn't working for the modern day professional. Now we are choosing to use CIA as a stepping stone. People are choosing to work at CIA because they care about service for a period, but then they also care about building their own resume. They focus on building their career opportunities. They focus on building their wealth. And you can't do any of those things from within the confines of Langley, Virginia. When I first left CIA in 2014, I went into about a 6-month period of time where I was unemployed. And a part of my unemployment was because leaving CIA, you still remain in a cover status, which means that you are still technically unable to disclose your CIA affiliation. However, all of the protections that you had, where the phone numbers to call and references that would say that you worked for them, those references and those protections are gone. There are even scenarios where both the husband and the wife are undercover and married, where the children don't know. And a big part of that is because in that secrecy agreement that you sign, there's also a disclosure where you have to say that you will ask permission from CIA before you disclose your true affiliation to your own children. And that way, you don't tell your 6-year-old that you're a CIA officer and then have them go brag to all their friends. Instead, you're now legally culpable for keeping the secret from your own family. My resume had references and previous work experience that never answered the phone and never responded to emails. So I couldn't even put together a decent resume to get a job. After 6 months of going from a successful CIA officer to an unemployed loser dad with your wife and your kids living in your in-laws' garage, it was a humbling experience. After leaving CIA, I discovered how much the CIA training and the skill sets that they had given me translated into everyday life. Business life, career life, relationships, family, social life. Because what CIA really teaches at its core is psychological frameworks, psychological mental models and systems of thinking that give you an edge, an unfair advantage over your opponent. Well, in normal everyday society, where nobody else has learned these psychological frameworks or processes, if you know them and other people don't, you have an unfair advantage in every element of life. And once I made that connection myself by using my CIA skills to get promoted in a corporate job, using my CIA skills to rapidly grow a new business, using my CIA skills to find and acquire partners and financiers to grow my business. What CIA is most concerned about is the disclosing of its operational secrets, not the secrets that it uses to optimize its own officers. All I needed to do was execute just like a CIA operation against a specific target that had an opportunity that I wanted. And that's how I got into a Fortune 7 company, CVS Health, by essentially cultivating an asset out of a senior executive who gave me a job sight unseen that was senior enough in position that all I had to do was perform. And then once I got into the role, I used more CIA skills to rapidly learn the job, to build relationships and alliances with other people who were already there, to help other people succeed and look good to their boss. And then 4 years later, I was promoted 4 times. It was a rapid experience that showed me how immediately tangible CIA skills were in the corporate setting, the business setting, and everyday life. And that's how I built my company, Everyday Spy, by teaching the skills that optimize CIA officers to work in all elements of life, in all elements of their health, all elements of how they build wealth and run a career, and all elements of their relationships and professional networking. Bleak is still honest, man. If you want to look at the world through a lens of optimism, by all means, do it. But if you want to look at a world where you will have a strategic advantage in the future, you have to see it for what it is. When I look at the future of the United States, it's important to understand 2 things. First, I'm looking at the future of the United States through the lens of a 43-year-old business owner and father of an 11-year-old and a 6-year-old. I have 2 children that aren't even of teenage years yet. And their young professional life won't really start until they're 19 to 21 years old. It's my responsibility now to think of the environment they will have when they are 20 years old. They can't make that decision for themselves. So when I think about the United States 9 years from now, 10 years from now, do I think the United States will be the best place for my 20-year-old son and my 16-year-old daughter to find opportunity? I'm not so sure that that's the case. I'm not so sure that the United States of 10 years from now won't be more divided, less powerful, more controlling from a federal government control of citizenship state, I'm not convinced that that's going to be the best foundation for my children to have opportunities, which is why I plan to leave the United States in the next 5 to 7 years, because I want to give them the opportunity to have success. In my estimation, the best opportunity for anybody who has a business, who has wealth, who's growing wealth, or who's growing any kind of business acumen, the best place to grow and succeed in the future is actually less likely to be the United States and more likely to be some other third nation. Until the United States has the time to go through its adolescence. The countries that are on my short list of places to seek opportunity for my children, there are countries in Europe like Portugal or Spain, Italy, Croatia. There are countries in Latin America. We specifically look at Costa Rica. We've looked at Mexico. There are countries that are very wealthy countries like Switzerland or Norway. There are countries all across Africa. These countries are not perfect in and of themselves, but where they are imperfect is different than where we are going in our own imperfection. Because where we are going is more towards a state of chaos and unpredictability, whereas many of these other third world countries or developing countries have very predictable systems. They may be corrupt, but they're predictably corrupt. There are many countries in the world where $10,000 can get you basically anything you want. Where here in the United States, $10,000 in the bank doesn't even qualify you for a home loan, right? How do you deal with that? How do you assess the impact of that on the future state of the family that you're trying to build?